The great council chamber was filled with the voices of alien leaders who had gathered to discuss the coming war, and as the glowing banners of many worlds hung across the wide hall, one word spread again and again across the floor: humans, weak humans, fragile humans, not ready for war. And the laughter that followed carried like thunder through the chamber. And yet at the edge of that same chamber, a single human envoy stood silent with eyes that burned, though lips stayed closed. The strongest race among the council, the scaled and proud Drakkar, leaned forward from their stone throne, their claws tapping against the metal table. As they spoke to all who would listen, the humans will break in their first battle. The humans will fall faster than dust in a storm. They will cry for mercy, and we will see their ships torn like paper and their bones scattered across the stars. And at this the other alien races laughed and cheered, for none doubted the words of the Drakkar. The tall insectoid Kryn waved their arms in sharp gestures, and their voice echoed with a cold tone, saying, "I have studied human records. They live short lives. They spend more time fighting among themselves than standing together. They cannot last against the enemy. They will be nothing but a burden to us. And so why even bring them to this war? Better to let them hide on their small blue planet and pray the enemy never looks their way." And again the chamber shook with cruel laughter. The silver-skinned Ziri spoke with calm voices, yet even their words were sharp as knives. Humans lack the mind for higher war. They are slow to adapt, slow to learn. They will bring nothing but shame to our fleets. Imagine them beside us in battle, stumbling with old weapons, shaking in fear, while the enemy cuts them down one by one. Their weakness will become our weakness, and I, for one, do not wish to carry the shame of being tied to such a race. And with that, many heads nodded in agreement. Even those who were not so quick to mock chose silence over defense. And so the humans were left alone at the edge of the gathering, while alien laughter burned in the air around them. The envoy said nothing, but inside their mind the fire grew brighter, for they knew the truth. Humans had been doubted before, humans had been underestimated before, and every time they had risen again stronger than before. The council decided then that humans could join the war only if they proved themselves in the front line, and many aliens smiled for them. It was a death sentence to throw the humans first against the enemy, was like feeding lambs to a wolf, and none expected them to survive. It was not a gift of trust. It was mockery, a cruel joke to show the galaxy how fast humans would break. The human envoy bowed their head before the council, but their silence was not surrender. Their silence was a promise within their heart. They swore that humanity would not be broken no matter the cost. They swore that the same laughter that filled the chamber would one day be silenced, not by words, but by actions, and the stars themselves would carry the memory of what was to come. The enemy was far from the council hall, yet even their spies heard the laughter and mockery, and they too believed it was truth. They sent messages among themselves, whispering of how weak the humans must be, how easy they would fall when the war began. And so across the galaxy the name human became a word of insult spoken in the mouths of friends and foes alike. And still the humans said nothing. On Earth the news reached the people, and many were angered, for no race likes to be called weak, no race likes to be treated as nothing. Yet anger soon gave way to unity across cities and colonies, across oceans and stars. Humans began to prepare. Every worker, every soldier, every scientist, every builder pushed forward with a fire none could see, but all would soon feel. And though the enemy laughed, and though the allies doubted, humanity began to move. In hidden bases, ships were built, not grand or shining like the fleets of the old alien powers, but strong and fast, made for survival, made for war. Men and women trained night and day, their bodies growing harder, their spirits unshaken. Children grew up hearing that the galaxy had mocked them, and so even the young learned to carry pride in silence. No laughter could break what was being formed within them. Back in the council chamber, the aliens planned their battles with grand words and glowing maps across the stars. But always when they reached the part where humans were named, they spoke with sneers. Let them take the front line. Let them bleed first. Let them be our shield, for that is all they are good for. And each time the human envoy listened without reply, for the time for words was not yet here. The war drums of the enemy grew louder each passing day, and soon the first great battle was set. The alien allies spoke of how they would crush the enemy in one swift strike, how their fleets would shine with power, how their strength would carry the day. But in the shadows, the humans readied themselves not for glory, not for pride, but for survival, and survival is where their true strength lived. The mockery of humans spread like fire through the stars. It was a song of doubt sung on every world and whispered in every council hall. Yet in that same fire, something else was born, something quiet and unseen. For every word of laughter fed the resolve of humankind. Every insult became fuel, every sneer became a weapon. And though the galaxy could not see it, humanity was shaping itself into something new. And so when the day came, when the fleets gathered, when the banners were raised, when the stars trembled with the beginning of war, the humans stood ready at the front line, where the council had pushed them with laughter and scorned their ships, smaller their numbers, fewer their weapons, older, and yet within them burned a fire no alien could see, no alien could measure, a fire that would soon turn the laughter into silence. The fleets of the council gathered in the black sea of space, banners glowing across the endless night, engines burning like suns. Every race brought their greatest weapons, their proudest warriors, their strongest war machines, the Drakkar ships, covered in armor as hard as stone, the Kryn ships, moving like sharp insects with wings of silver, the Ziri, fleets long and bright, with energy flowing like rivers of light across their hulls, and at the front where no one wished to be, the human ships stood, small and dark. The human ships were not grand, they were not beautiful, they did not shine like the fleets of the old races. Instead, they carried scars from old battles, rust along their edges, engines that groaned but still worked, weapons not sharp, but reliable. And though the council placed them at the front with scorn, the humans stood ready, their voices silent, their eyes fixed on the void ahead, for they knew what waited was not just battle, but trial. The enemy came without warning, their ships dark like shadows, with edges sharp as knives. They moved through the void like predators, circling prey, their numbers without end, their engines silent as death itself. And when they struck like storms, tearing through the first wave with fire and light. The Drakkar roared with pride and charged forward, claws gripping their controls, weapons blasting with fury. They believed their scales could never break, their fleets could never fall. But the enemy tore through their armor like paper, their pride became screams, their ships burned one by one. The mighty Drakkar learned the truth that strength alone was nothing before this foe. The Kryn darted across the battle, their ships fast and sharp, their movements quick like blades in the dark. They thought their speed would save them. They thought no enemy could touch them. Yet the enemy adapted faster, their dark ships twisted and turned, cutting through the Kryn with precision, and soon the space that had been alive with the wings of the insect warriors became silent, littered with broken shards of their fleet. The Ziri unleashed their energy storms, glowing across the void with rivers of burning light. Their weapons carved wide paths through the enemy. And for a moment, they believed they would prevail, but the enemy learned the shape of their storms and turned their darkness to shield against the light. And the Ziri ships shone brightly as they fell, their silver hulls shattered into fading stars. The council fleets one by one fell to despair. The laughter that had filled the chamber before the war was gone, now replaced by silence, broken only by screams and flames. Every proud boast had been swallowed by the void. Every insult once thrown at the humans had turned back upon the mouths of those who had spoken them. Through it all the humans fought, though their ships were small, though their weapons were old, though their numbers were few. They moved with a strange rhythm, not grand, not perfect, but stubborn. Every loss was met with another strike. Every fallen ship gave fuel to the fire of the next. Their lines bent under the storm, but they did not break. The enemy began to notice. They saw how the humans held where the strong had fallen. They saw how the fragile ships did not scatter. They saw how the silent fire within them refused to fade. And though they pressed harder, still the humans answered harder. Still their small ships, weaving through the storm, their crews, fighting with hands steady, even as death closed in. The council leaders, watching from the rear, saw their fleets burning, saw their warriors falling, and for the first time their eyes turned not to themselves, but to the humans who held the front line. Though mocked, though doubted, though thrown into the fire, the humans were the only ones who had not yet fallen. The battle raged for hours, though, in the void time had no meaning. The stars drowned in light and fire. Every race suffered, every banner burned. Yet always, when the enemy struck the hardest, it was the humans who met them first. And always, though many fell, the line held the shield, remained, the silence endured. At last the command was given to retreat. The council leaders ordered their fleets to pull back to escape into the shadows of safer space, for the battle was lost. The first strike of the enemy had broken them. The war that they had promised would be swift victory had become the first defeat, and it burned like a wound that would never heal. The humans followed the retreat, but their ships were fewer, their crews scarred, their faces silent. They did not cry out, they did not curse. They only carried with them the weight of what they had seen, for in their hearts they knew this defeat was only the beginning, and the galaxies still doubted them, though the truth was clear to those who looked with open eyes. When the council gathered again, the chamber was not filled with laughter. No mocking voices rose, no sneers, no cruel words. Instead, the chamber was filled with silence, heavy and sharp as blades, each leader carrying the shadow of loss across their face. Yet still none wished to admit what they had seen. None wished to speak the truth that the humans had held the line when all others had failed. The Drakkar blamed their armor, saying it was not strong enough. The Kryn blamed their speed, saying it was not quick enough. The Ziri blamed their storms, saying they had not burned bright enough. And so the blame passed around the chamber like a mask no one wished to remove, and still the humans stood at the edge, their envoy, silent, their eyes burning with fire that no defeat could kill. The first defeat had changed the galaxy, for the enemy had shown their power, and the council had shown their weakness. Yet within that defeat a seed was planted, a seed that none but the humans could feel, for they had learned in silence, they had seen in silence, and what they carried now was not despair, but resolve. For every loss, every broken ship, every fallen comrade became part of the fire that would burn brighter still. And though the enemy celebrated, though their shadows spread across the stars, though their whispers carried of easy victory, the truth was that something had begun to stir, something small, something quiet, something that could not yet be seen by alien eyes. Humanity had entered the war, and though mocked and broken, though bloodied and scarred, they had not fallen, and the enemy had not yet understood the cost of underestimating them. The retreat ended with heavy silence. Across the stars, the fleets that had once carried banners of pride now drifted, broken. The stations that had been filled with music of victory now echoed with sorrow. The council worlds that had once mocked humanity now spoke little and trusted less, for the shadow of the first defeat had fallen upon them all, and they could not escape its weight. Yet while the proud races mourned, while they spoke of loss, while they blamed one another, the humans did not speak. They moved quietly, repairing their ships, rebuilding their weapons, tending to their wounded, their faces calm, their eyes sharp. The silence that followed them was not sorrow, but something else, something deeper, something older. It was not despair, but fire. The enemy believed the battle had broken the council. They believed the war would be easy now. They spread through the stars with cruel laughter, their dark fleets carving through lonely colonies, their shadow stretching further with every strike. Yet in the heart of every attack the humans were there, their small ships appearing where least expected, their crews fighting until nothing remained, their silence louder than the roars of any other race. The Drakkar saw them and did not understand how such small vessels held against storms that had shattered their mighty armor. The Kryn saw them and did not understand how ships so slow could fight when their speed had failed. The Ziri saw them and did not understand how dull weapons could strike where their glowing storms had burned away without success. Yet the humans did not explain, they only fought and endured. In the chambers of the council, arguments rose and fell like endless tides, voices shouting of strategy, voices crying of loss, voices cursing the enemy, and voices cursing one another. Through it all the human envoy stood at the edge silent. They were given no seat, they were given no respect. Yet when the shouting ended, when no answer remained, I turned toward the humans, though none admitted it, and every heart whispered the same thought, though none dared to speak it. Perhaps it was the humans who must lead. But the humans did not seek to lead, they did not crave the throne, they did not ask for command. Instead, they returned to their ships, they trained their soldiers, they studied the patterns of the enemy, they listened to the silence between battles, for they had learned something the others had not, that the war would not be won with pride or with speed or with storms of light. The war would be won with patience, with unity, with fire that burned quiet but steady. The soldiers of humanity carried this fire within them. Every battle, every strike, every retreat was fuel for the flame. The enemy saw men and women who should have broken, yet who rose again, who should have fled, yet who stood firm, who should have fallen silent in despair, yet whose silence held more strength than 1,000 cries the enemy could not understand, and in that lack of understanding they began to fear. For fear grows not from what is seen, but from what is unseen. The darkness knew the shape of Drakkar strength, and had broken at the darkness knew the shape of Kryn's speed, and had shattered at the darkness knew the shape of Ziri's storms, and had turned it aside. But the darkness did not know the shape of humanity, for humanity revealed nothing, and this silence became a weapon greater than any blade. The soldiers of the other races began to notice when they fought beside humans they felt steadier, when they marched with humans they felt braver, when they stood in silence with humans they felt something they had never felt before, a sense that the battle was not the end, that defeat was not forever, that there was a way forward even through the fire. And so slowly, quietly, the fire spread. The Kryn pilots who once mocked human slowness began to fly beside them, watching their movements, learning patience rather than pride. The Drakkar warriors, who once laughed at human weakness, began to guard their lines, knowing that in those lines there was strength. The Ziri commanders, who once dismissed human weapons, began to listen to their silence, and from it they drew new resolve. And though the council still bickered, though the leaders still fought, the soldiers of every race began to change, for the fire was spreading beyond humanity. The enemy did not yet see this change. They pressed harder. They gathered greater numbers. They spread their dark fleets into new systems. Every victory they claimed made them louder. Every world they burned made them prouder. And still the humans remained silent. Still they endured. Still they fought in shadows and silence, waiting and watching. Then came the whispers, small at first, carried only among soldiers who had fought beside humans, whispers that said the humans were not weak, whispers that said the humans had saved more lives than any other race, whispers that said perhaps the humans knew a truth the others had forgotten. The whispers moved through barracks, through fleets, through stations, until the silence of humanity had become not just silence, but legend. And legends have power greater than any weapon, greater than any fleet, for legends burn in the heart and make the weak stand taller, and make the broken rise again. The enemy had not counted on this. They had not seen that silence could be louder than victory, that patience could outlast pride, that fire could burn even when hidden. And so they did not prepare for what was coming. For in the silence, humanity was preparing something greater than battle plans, something greater than weapons or ships. They were preparing belief, not only in themselves, but in their allies. They were teaching the galaxy to endure. They were teaching the galaxy to fight not with pride, not with storms, not with speed, but with fire steady and unbroken. The silent fire was spreading across the stars. It grew in the hearts of soldiers. It grew in the whispers of fleets. It grew in the shadows, where the enemy believed victory already won. And soon, though no one yet knew it, the silence would rise into a roar that would change the war forever. The council chambers were heavy with anger and fear. The leaders of the great races filled the vast hall, their voices rising and falling in endless waves. Some demanded retreat, some demanded surrender, some demanded desperate charges into enemy space, yet none found agreement, and none found peace. The war was slipping through their fingers, and every argument sounded more like weakness than strength. At the edge of the chamber, the human envoy stood silent, as always, his eyes calm, his face unreadable. When the shouts reached their loudest, when the threats and curses filled the air, he raised his hand only slightly, and the chamber grew still, for the council had come to expect his silence, and they had begun to fear it, for silence carries weight when words lose meaning. He spoke at last in a voice steady and low. He told them that the enemy did not fear the proud speeches of the Drakkar. They did not fear the swift tactics of the Kryn. They did not fear the glowing storms of Ziri, for all of these had been broken in the first great battle. But he said the enemy feared something they did not understand. They feared the human way, to endure, to adapt, to rise again after every fall. He said the time had come not to run, not to argue, not to divide, but to rise together. The words were simple, yet in them burned the fire that silence had prepared. The Drakkar leader stared with heavy eyes, remembering how human soldiers had stood beside his fallen kin. The Kryn commander clenched her hands, recalling the patience of human pilots who had flown with her and survived the storms. The Ziri elder lowered his head, recalling how human troops had held ground long after his own had broken. The fire was spreading now, not only among soldiers, but among leaders. The decision was made not with cheers, not with shouts, but with quiet nods, with bowed heads, with heavy hearts. They would trust humanity. They would give them the chance to guide the war. The council handed command, not as a throne, not as a crown, but as a torch passed into the hands of those who had never sought it. The humans accepted not with pride, but with resolve. The turning point began not with a battle, but with training. The humans taught patience, they drilled endurance. They showed the other races how to hold the line, how to fight, as one how to rise. After every strike, it was hard for the proud Drakkar to wait. It was hard for the swift Kryn to slow. It was hard for the glowing Ziri to dim their storms. But slowly they learned, they listened, they changed. The fire spread wider now. When the enemy returned, expecting another broken defense, they found something new. They found lines that did not shatter. They found fleets that did not scatter. They found soldiers who fought with rhythm steady as the beating heart. The enemy attacked again and again. But each time, they met walls that bent without breaking, ships that burned without falling, soldiers who bled without surrendering. It was not victory yet, but it was not defeat. It was something the enemy had never faced before. It was resistance. The battles grew fiercer. The enemy pressed harder. They sent larger fleets. They unleashed greater weapons. But in every fight, the allies grew stronger. For each defeat taught them more. Each retreat taught them patience. Each loss lit the fire brighter. The humans guided, without shouting, without boasting. They spoke little, but their silence held the weight of strength, and the others followed. The Drakkar who once roared now stood quiet in battle lines, their axes heavy, but steady. The Kryn who once flew alone now moved in formation, their speed controlled, but deadly. The Ziri who once stormed with blinding light now struck with precision, their storm smaller but sharper. Together they fought not as separate races, but as one fire forged from many flames. The enemy began to notice their victories grew slower, their losses grew sharper, their laughter grew quiet. Whispers spread among them, dark whispers that spoke of humans who could not be broken, who carried silence like a weapon, who turned allies into brothers in arms. Fear grew in the heart of the enemy, for fear is the seed of doubt, and doubt is the beginning of defeat. The turning point came at the Battle of Va'ruun Gate, a fortress world standing at the edge of the enemy's path. The council had once planned to abandon it, calling it lost, but the humans refused. They said the fortress would stand not because of stone or steel, but because it must, because its fall would break hope. They led the fleets to Va'ruun Gate. They stood before its walls. They prepared not for retreat, but for endurance. The enemy came in endless waves, dark ships blotting out the stars, weapons burning brighter than suns. The fortress shook, the fleets bent, the lines strained, but they did not break. The humans fought in silence, steady as stone. The Drakkar roared with fire that no longer burned wild, but burned deep. The Kryn darted with speed, sharpened by patience. The Ziri storms struck with precision, each strike cutting deeper than before. Together they stood, together they held. The battle raged through night and day, through silence and fire, through blood and steel. And when the last wave broke, when the enemy turned at last, when the stars cleared of their dark fleet, Va'ruun Gate still stood, scarred but unbroken, battered but alive. The fortress had held the allies, had held the fire, had not gone out, it had grown. The council stood in silence at the news. Then at last they understood. The turning point had come, not with pride, not with boasting, not with storms, but with fire, steady, silent, unbroken. The enemy could be resisted. The enemy could be held. The enemy could be beaten. The war was far from over. The darkness still spread. The enemy still gathered greater power. But now the allies carried something new within them, belief, not only in weapons, not only in fleets, but in themselves and each other, in the humans who had shown them the way. The fire that had once been silent now burned across the stars. And in that fire was hope, and in that hope was the turning of the war. The enemy had always moved with arrogance. Their fleets darkened the stars, and their armies swept over worlds without pause, for they believed no power could resist their strength. They mocked every voice that spoke of human courage, and they laughed at every ally who chose to stand with them. Yet, after the Battle of Va'ruun Gate, the laughter began to fade, and the shadow of doubt stretched across their ranks. Whispers ran through their fleets, whispers that spoke of humans who refused to die, who carried silence like a shield, who fought as if defeat itself could not touch them. The whispers spread faster than orders, and soon even the high lords of the enemy began to listen with unease, for they knew whispers could shatter armies more than fire or steel. In the fortress of the enemy's command, the lords gathered to debate their next strike. Some called for greater fleets, some demanded new weapons, some even cried for destruction of whole stars to erase the allies at once, yet their words shook with fear, for they remembered Vern Gate. And the walls that did not fall, they remembered fleets that bent, but did not break. They remembered warriors who fought as one. Among them rose one who had once been proud and cruel. His voice had commanded whole worlds to burn, but now it carried doubt. He spoke of the humans with unease. He said the humans were not many, yet they were stronger than numbers. He said the humans had something unseen, something that spread through allies like a flame. He warned that this flame would grow, if not extinguish soon. But his warning was met with silence, for none could deny his fear, and none could answer it. Meanwhile, across the stars, the allies gathered strength. Their fleets repaired their walls, rebuilt, their soldiers rested. Yet more importantly, their spirits rose. The fire lit by the humans burned brighter. Now the Drakkar, trained with patience, the Kryn drilled in perfect unity. The Ziri forged storms sharper than ever, and the humans watched, guiding with quiet resolve. When news came that the enemy gathered near the twin moons of Saren, the allies moved not with fear, but with purpose. The fleets rose into the void. The soldiers prepared for another stand. The humans led them not with boasts, but with silence that carried meaning, for silence spoke of certainty, and certainty gave strength. The enemy arrived vast, as always, their ships, spreading like a storm of black wings, their weapons glowing like suns about to burst. Yet behind their sighs hid the cracks of fear, for their voices carried whispers of humans. Their eyes carried doubt that no command could silence. The battle began with thunder. The enemy struck first with storms of fire. The allies bent under the strike, but did not break lines. Held ships answered storms with steady rhythm. The Drakkar axes cleaved through boarding waves. The Kryn wings danced in perfect arcs. The Ziri storms cut holes through the enemy's dark sky, and through it all the humans stood calm, directing with words few but heavy with weight. The enemy pressed harder, their lords desperate to crush the growing flame. They hurled more ships. They unleashed greater weapons. They sacrificed without mercy. But the allies did not fall. Instead, with every strike, they grew stronger. With every wound, they grew sharper. The humans led them not to victory by speed, but to victory by endurance, and endurance broke the enemy. In the heart of battle, a moment came when the enemy line wavered. Their ships slowed, their storms weakened. Fear spread faster than orders, and for the first time in the long war, the enemy turned not in retreat planned, but in retreat. Broken allies saw it, allies felt it, and the fire roared brighter than ever. The shattered enemy fled, leaving wreckage across the stars. Their lords screamed in rage, their commands lost in chaos, their pride broken on the anvil of resistance. The allies did not chase, for they knew this was not the final battle, but it was the first true fracture in the shadow. When news of the shattered enemy spread across the allied worlds, hope rose like dawn. People once silent with fear lifted their voices. People once hiding in shadows stepped into light, for they had seen what no one believed possible. The enemy could be broken. The enemy could be made to flee. In the council chamber, the leaders spoke with voices steady, not of retreat, not of surrender, but of victory. They honored the humans who had shown them the way. They honored the unity forged in fire and silence. They honored the soldiers who held the lines and turned despair into hope. And though the war was far from over, they knew the path had changed. Across the stars, the enemy lords gathered again, but now their chamber echoed, not with pride, but with fear. Their voices cracked with doubt, their plans tangled with anger. Some blamed each other, some demanded endless sacrifice, some whispered of retreat. And through it all, the shadow of humanity grew larger in their minds. The humans had become more than soldiers. They had become a symbol, and symbols are harder to destroy than armies. The shattered enemy licked their wounds, but the allies burned brighter. They rebuilt faster, they trained harder, they believed deeper, for every scar was now a mark of endurance, every wound a memory of fire, every loss a reason to rise stronger. The humans spoke little, but their silence carried through the fleets, through the armies, through the world, for silence had become louder than words and stronger than fear. The war was far from done, yet the balance had shifted. The enemy, once unshaken, now trembled. The allies, once divided, now stood together. The humans, once mocked, now carried the fire of hope. The stars themselves seemed to wait, holding breath, for what was to come for the war, was changing. The fire was spreading, and the shattered enemy knew that the end of their pride had begun. The next battles would decide. Much the enemy would not fall easily. They would return with greater storms and darker weapons. But the Allies no longer stood in despair. They stood in unity. They stood in silence. They stood in fire. And through them, humanity carried the promise that even the darkest empire could shatter. And thus the war turned toward hope as the shadow trembled before the fire that refused to die. The days after the Battle of Sarin Moons carried a new light across the Allied worlds for the first time. In countless cycles, the people who once hid in shadows now walked with courage. Their voices rose not in whispers of fear, but in songs of hope. Markets that had once been silent with dread now rang with laughter. Streets that had once seen only retreat now saw banners of unity, for the enemy had fled, and the memory of their flight became a fire in every heart. The humans who had been mocked now stood as a symbol across all worlds, no longer seen as fragile, no longer seen as prey. They were seen as the spark that lit the fire of resistance. Their silence had become a song. Their endurance had become a story. Their will had become a legend. And every ally carried it forward, for legends do not belong to one. They belong to all who believe. In the council chamber, the Allied fleet leaders gathered once more. Their faces, once weighed by doubt, now lifted with pride, yet not with arrogance. They spoke with steady voices of building not only armies, but trust. They spoke of forging a chain so strong that even the darkest storms could not break it. The humans sat among them, their presence quiet yet powerful, for every leader knew that words could guide, but example could inspire. The Drakkar with their iron strength pledged not just warriors, but forges to build weapons for all, not for themselves alone. The Kryn with their wings pledged not just soldiers, but guardians for every allied ship to fly beside the Ziri. With their storms pledged not just power, but shields of energy to guard the weak. And the humans pledged not wealth, not vast fleets, but something deeper. They pledged resolve that would never bend. So the alliance grew not only in number, but in spirit. Fleets that once moved apart now trained together, armies that once mistrusted now ate and laughed side by side, walls that once stood alone now linked into vast shields across the stars. Unity was not only a word, it became a rhythm that moved through every ally like a pulse. The enemy watched from their dark thrones. They saw fleets, they saw armies, they saw weapons. But what they feared most was not the firepower. It was the unity, for unity was harder to shatter than ships. Unity was harder to silence than voices. Unity was harder to conquer than worlds. And the enemy lords knew their greatest weapon, fear, was losing its grip. Still the enemy did not rest. Their forges burned hotter, their ships multiplied, their commanders drilled soldiers. Without mercy, they plotted new storms, new traps, new weapons of horror, for they believed still that size and fire could erase hope. But in their councils their voices trembled, for they remembered how hope had already broken their lines once and could do so again. When the alliance marched toward the border worlds, their banners shining in void, and their voices steady, the people of those worlds rose in cheers. They offered not only food and shelter, but their own hands to fight, for they had seen the flames spread, and they wished to carry it to the alliance, accepted them not as lesser, not as weak, but as part of the chain, for every link mattered, and every voice counted. In one such world, a small village once burned by enemy hands lit fires of their own, not of war, but of welcome. Children who had once hidden in caves now ran to greet soldiers. Farmers who had once been under fear now stood tall with pride. They spoke of humans with awe. They spoke of allies with love. They spoke of unity with joy, and their voices carried through the ranks stronger than any order. The alliance grew in numbers and in heart. Soon the fleets that once feared enemy storms now moved with courage. The armies that once shook at the sight of black banners now roared with strength. The people who once had now rose, and the humans who had begun it all watched quietly, their silence carrying meaning deeper than words. In the training field, soldiers of every race stood side by side, learning each other's ways. Drakkar taught strength, to Kryn wings Kryn taught flight, to Ziri storms Ziri taught patience, to human endurance, and humans taught all how silence could be sharper than any blade. Each learned, each grew, and together they became something greater than any one race could be alone. The enemy tried to strike smaller worlds, hoping to spread fear again. But every time they arrived, they met not broken defenses, but united shields. Every time they unleashed fire, they found not silence of defeat, but silence of resistance. Every time they tried to crush one, they faced many, and the fear they had once spread now turned back upon them. The lords of the enemy began to argue louder than before. Some cried to retreat and wait. Some demanded more fire and cruelty. Some whispered of breaking apart. Their voices no longer carried the unity of power they once had, for unity had passed from them to the alliance, and without unity, even the strongest fleet is fragile. The rise of the alliance was not only seen in battles, it was seen in the eyes of children, in the songs of workers, and the banners raised on broken walls. It was seen in the way strangers became brothers and sisters, in the way fear gave birth to courage, in the way silence carried hope. The enemy could not understand it, they could not measure it, they could not fight it, for it was not bound to ships or armies, it was bound to spirit. As the alliance prepared for greater battles, the humans reminded them of one truth, that victory is not in one moment alone. Victory is in every step taken together. Victory is in every wall rebuilt. Victory is in every hand that lifts another. And so the alliance did not rise in pride, but in purpose, for pride can shatter, but purpose endures. Across the stars the enemy saw this rise and trembled, though they gathered storms, though they built weapons, though they shouted of conquest in their hearts. They felt the truth. The shadow that once covered the stars was breaking, the flame was spreading, and the alliance was rising. The war was far from over, the enemy was far from defeated, yet the tide had turned, and every allied heart knew it. They knew that hope had taken root. They knew that silence had become stronger than storms. They knew that unity had become the greatest weapon. And so they marched forward, carrying not only swords, not only shields, but a promise that the darkness would not last forever. And thus the rise of the alliance marked the beginning of a new era, an era where fear no longer ruled, an era where unity stood firm, an era where even the mightiest enemy could tremble before the fire of hope carried by humans and shared by all. The stars shivered as the last march of the enemy began, their black fleets stretching like a river of steel across the void, their banners of conquest hanging like shadows over every world. They sought to claim, their commanders shouted of victory, their soldiers marched with thunder. Their lords believed that if they gathered all their strength in one blow, the alliance would shatter. Yet beneath the noise of their war drums, there was fear, for unity had left them there. Voices no longer sang together. They only echoed in pride, and pride is fragile. The alliance gathered and returned, their fleets stretching from horizon to horizon, their banners bright with color and hope, their ships lined with soldiers not of one world, but of many voices united in purpose. Leaders from Drakkar, Krinziri, and humans stood side by side in the council, their words not of fear, but of resolve. They spoke of defending not only land, not only stars, but the spirit that bound them. They spoke of silence that carried more power than noise. They spoke of hope that carried more weight than fire, and every soldier carried that fire in their chest. As the two great forces met at the edge of the galaxy, a silence deeper than any void filled the stars. The enemy looked upon the alliance with rage. The alliance looked upon the enemy with calm. And in that silence, every heart knew that what followed would decide not only who ruled, but who endured. The battle began with storms of fire, enemy ships roaring forward with endless fury, their cannons shaking the void, their storms tearing through shields. Yet the alliance did not break their lines, held strong their shields, overlapped their wings, soared their storms, answered storm, for every ally carried not only their own strength, but the strength of all beside them. When one ship faltered, another shield rose. When one army stumbled, another hand lifted them. No voice was left unheard, no warrior was left alone. The humans stood at the heart of the battle, their ships fewer, their weapons smaller, yet their silence roared louder than thunder. They gave no cry of fear, they gave no cry of anger. They moved with steady patience, they struck with careful precision, and every enemy that faced them learned again the lesson once mocked, that humans did not break, they endured, and endurance is a weapon stronger than any blade. The Drakkar broke enemy walls with their iron strength, their ships colliding with foes in brutal storms. The Kryn soared above, weaving through enemy ranks like fire in the wind, their wings cutting the skies. With speed, the Ziri unleashed storms of light, shields blooming over allies, as energy waves shattered enemy lines. And through it all, humans remained the quiet anchor, the flame that would not die. The enemy lords screamed in fury. They hurled ships without care. They sacrificed soldiers without thought. They unleashed weapons of horror, meant to shatter hope. Yet hope did not shatter when a weapon of fire tore through an allied ship. The silence of the survivors grew stronger. When a weapon of terror echoed across calms, the voices of the Alliance rose louder, for they did not fight for conquest. They fought for each other, and that is a strength no weapon can erase. The battle stretched across hours, and then days. The stars themselves, lit with the fire of war wreckage, drifted in rivers across the void. Yet the Alliance never broke. Their unity grew stronger. With every clash, their courage grew brighter. With every loss, for every fallen soldier became a memory carried forward. Every broken ship became a reason to endure, and the enemy could not understand it. They could not measure it. They could not fight it. In the heart of the storm, the enemy lords gathered their strongest fleet, a circle of dark ships, meant to crush the Allied command. They charged forward with all their fury, believing that if the head was cut, the body would fall. Yet they found not fear, but defiance. The Allied leaders stood together, their fleets interlocked, their banners raised high. The Drakkar commander roared his oath, the Kryn leader soared into fire. Without pause, the Ziri matriarch spread shields that lit the void, and the human captain stood silent, his hand steady on the command rail, and his silence spoke louder than any vow. The clash shook the stars, enemy fire struck Allied shields, Allied storms cut enemy wings, wreckage burned across the void, yet still the Alliance held, and in that moment the enemy lords faltered, their pride shook, their voices cracked, their unity broke, and once unity breaks, no army can stand. The humans pressed forward, not with fire alone, but with will. They did not boast, they did not roar. They simply moved step by step, strike by strike, shield by shield. And with every step the enemy line bent. With every strike the enemy pride cracked. With every shield the enemy despair grew. Until at last the black banners that had once covered the stars began to fall, torn and burning in the void. The enemy lord saw the truth at last, that conquest cannot stand against unity, that fear cannot outlast hope, that pride cannot endure where silence speaks. They tried to rally, but their voices carried no weight. They tried to command, but their soldiers no longer listened. They tried to flee, but the Alliance closed around them, not with vengeance, but with justice. The final moment came not with a roar, but with silence. The humans at the center of the Allied fleet stood firm, their ships battered, yet unbroken, their resolve steady as stone. The Allied fleets surrounded the last enemy banner, and with one final united strike, the shadow was torn away. The enemy fleet shattered, their lords silenced, their pride erased. Across the stars silence spread once more, but not the silence of fear. It was the silence of peace, a silence where no soldier trembled, a silence where no child hid, a silence where hope breathed freely again. And that silence was the gift of humans, the gift that had turned mockery into legend, weakness into strength, silence into victory. The Alliance did not claim empires, they did not raise thrones, they rebuilt, they healed, they honored the fallen, and they remembered that unity is not forged once, it is forged every day, in every act, in every choice. And the humans remained, as they always were, quiet, steady, enduring, never loud, never boastful, for they knew that true strength does not shout, true strength simply stands. And so the final reckoning ended not with the enemy conquering the stars, but with the Alliance holding them together, not with pride rising, but with unity shining, not with fear ruling, but with silence speaking. And in the stories told across generations, it was remembered that they underestimated humans, but the Allies proved them wrong, and the legend of that silence lived forever.